Going to focus on our PDSA cycles and our monitoring process for schools identified for comprehensive support. So that's the topic of our office hours today. Everyone's always kind of welcome to join, but this will be focused mainly on schools identified for comprehensive support, at least the latter half. And I'm joined today by our team. We have Simona and Tony and Josh. I can't remember if you were on the last office hours or not, but Josh is returning as an education quality coordinator. And we have Mariana, who is leading the grant work for the 1003 School Improvement Grant. And okay, great. And I am currently stepping in as the interim director of the division, as well as maintaining the director of continuous improvement work as well. So as I mentioned today, we're going to discuss the PDSA cycle data collection and review the 1003 School Improvement Grant monitoring process in more detail, and of course, take questions from you all. So at this point, you've already developed your goals and change ideas and your continuous improvement plans. And now we're going to talk about how to monitor the progress and the process of the efficacy of these change ideas in your PDSA cycles. And so I'm going to quickly just walk through an example of the entire continuous improvement process to set the context for the PDSA cycle. So here's an example of how your goals might be developed using disaggregated data analyses from your comprehensive needs assessment. And in this example, I'm using disaggregated data for English learners that reveal potential needs across multiple data categories. So for example, student learning data show that there are significant gaps in proficiency between English learners and non-English learner student populations. And on local and state assessments, only 10% of our English language learners in grades K through 3 are proficient in the reading standards. And you'll recall that setting clear, measurable student learning goals entails 4 basic criteria: the what, the for whom, by when, and by how much. The what component operationalizes the specific skills and processes and practices that are being improved. The for whom is talking about the intended student population for whom the goal is set. The by when component identifies by when you can expect outcomes to be achieved. And the by how much component indicates the degree of improvement you expect will be made by that time. So in this case, the highlighted example shows specific goals related to the data findings we just looked at for English learners. So just walking through these very quickly to get to the PDSA cycle portion. This information is found on our website in a series of modules in case you wanted to go back and look at those recorded PowerPoints. So based on these goals and the underlying problems of practice related to the goal, you can use your root cause analysis process or your fishbone diagram to uncover and confirm the root causes of the challenges that you're experiencing, and to make sure you're solving the right problem. So in this example, the problem of practice is that most of our English learners in grades K through 3 are not meeting reading proficiency levels. And here are some potential root causes of that previous problem of practice, and I'll just give you a second to peruse some of those examples. Okay, so then you're choosing your evidence-based change ideas based on your problem of practice, root causes, and your intended goals. And it's the implementation and efficacy of these change ideas that's what you'll be monitoring often, frequently, in your PDSA cycles, your Plan, Do, Study, Act cycles. So in this example, the change ideas include recommended practices from the IES practice guides to integrate intensive small group reading interventions and extensive vocabulary instruction and peer-assisted learning opportunities for EL students. monitoring progress every 3 weeks. So we're setting very specific practices here that we can implement and monitor through the PDSA cycles and measure. So prior to implementing your PDSA cycles, you also want to ensure that you have measures in place to determine if and how the practices were implemented and how you'll measure the efficacy or success of the changes in relation to student learning goals. So in this example, implementation is measured using teacher surveys. Oh, thought that was the record. Okay. So in this case, we're using teacher surveys and lesson plan artifacts and learning walk or observation checklists. And the student learning outcome measures include state and local assessment results for long-term outcomes. And then you need your intermediate and more frequent measures. So oral reading fluency measures and other formative assessment measures to satisfy the shorter term progress monitoring. And here is how this all comes together. So it's a side-by-side view of the specific change idea examples with the examples of those related measures. And I'll give you a minute to take a look at that. Okay, so during the planning phase of the PDSA cycle, it's important to make predictions about what you think will happen when the change is implemented. So what do you expect to see in terms of teacher and student behavior, as well as any systems-related issues that may be impacted during implementation? And then during the do phase, that's when you're implementing the change as intended, collecting relevant data and information about student progress, as well as any other process or implementation factors that might need to be considered for adjustment, spread, or scale. And during the study and act phase, you're reflecting on those data that you collected, making sense of the results, and determining whether to adapt, adopt, or abandon the change altogether. And if you decide to adopt it for full implementation spread, you will make those decisions on how to do that. And all of these decisions should be based on data. So as you're implementing the practices and collecting the measurement data, you can use this protocol or framework to monitor progress. And this image illustrates the framework for the cycle, including guiding questions at each phase that you can consider. So in the plan phase, questions include how, where, when, and with whom will the practice be implemented? What do you predict will happen as a result of implementing the practice? And in the do phase, you'll carry out the practice as intended and collect the relevant data. During the study phase, guiding questions include, was the implementation carried out as planned? That's a really important one when mapping onto student learning results. What have you learned and how are you making sense of the results? Do the results match your initial predictions? And what did you observe that was surprising? Then finally, during the act phase, the guiding questions include, regarding this change idea, how might you need to adapt or strengthen it to meet the needs of all your students? And do you need to revise your theory of improvement or your driver diagram? And if so, how so? So embedding this type of reflective PDSA inquiry into your regularly occurring professional learning community spaces could be one way that you develop a habit of data inquiry, or in your grade level planning or whatever spaces you have. That it's important you have the time, the space, and the format to really focus on these cycles. And be sure to keep the inquiry focused on data and student learning, and ensure that explicit agendas and facilitation are in order so that everything can stay on track, because we know that time is a precious commodity. And on this slide, there is a link to a sample agenda model that you can use or adapt or choose your own. I'll pause there to see if there are any chat questions I need to address, and then we'll move on to Mariana's section.
There's no questions in the chat right now, Lori. No.
Okay, we'll leave some time at the end for questions as well. Marianne, I'll hand it over to you to talk about the 1003 School Improvement Grant Monitoring.
Thank you, Lori. Hi, everyone. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Mariana Haralabopoulos, and I am the 1003 School Improvement Grant Coordinator. So you're probably sitting there asking yourself, why do we monitor? What's the big deal? Well, it is a federal requirement in the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, or ESEA, in Section 1111 D2B. This section mentions that state agencies must monitor the schools in order to see improvement of student outcomes based on the indicators in the statewide accountability system. We also monitor awardees because we want to help you and see where you may be getting stuck or having a rough time, or dare I say, even a good time. LEAs with the 1003 School Improvement Grant will be monitored twice per year, once in February and once at the end of the year in June. The monitoring consists of a set of questions for the LEA and the identified school or schools. The monitoring process is as follows. You're going to log into the Grants Management System, or the GMS, click on Title I SI Monitoring, or Title I SIOM, open your SU or SD's monitoring section, complete all tabs in order, and under the Mid-Year Monitoring tab, you're going to download and complete an Excel document with monitoring questions. Respond to these questions with technical assistance from the AOE as needed, and upload responses back to the GMS. You will then meet with the School Improvement Grant Coordinator to discuss these responses. The grant coordinator will organize virtual meetings over Teams and will write a draft report. The LEA will then review the AOE draft report for confirmation of findings, and finally, the AOE will publish the final report to GMS. Let's delve into the process in a little more detail. The mid-year monitoring questions are listed here. Notice these 4 questions are for identified school or schools to answer. Once in the GMS, you will have to download the Excel document of monitoring questions for each identified school to complete, and then upload these answers back to the GMS for the AOE to review. I quickly just want to go into a few more details about a couple of questions. Here is question 1 for the schools. In this table, we want you to enter the grant activity on the left-hand side of the table, and then choose yes or no from the drop-down box in the middle for whether the activity was implemented as intended or not. Note that you have to click on the box in the middle column for the drop-down arrow to show up. See that black box surrounding right there? That's your drop-down arrow and your drop-down box. The example here is the Education Development Center completed professional development with staff, but no, it was not implemented as intended. On the right-hand side of the table, there is an explanation for why the grant activity was not implemented as intended, and it was because all staff couldn't be there due to weather, so they were not able to institute any changes. Additionally, for this question, when we refer to grant activities, we are talking about the specific change ideas that can be measured and not necessarily each related investment. Here is question 3. This table is similar in structure to question 1. However, along with the grant activity or activities, we need you to enter the related investments on the left-hand side as well. Then choose the outcome or result from the drop-down box in the middle, which has 3 choices: improved, declined, or stayed the same, with regards to whether the activity had an effect on student learning outcomes and the CIP goals. Again, note that you have to click on the box in the middle column for the drop-down arrow to show up, just like in question 1. On the right is the quantified amount of improvement or decrease in scores. The example here starts on the left-hand side of the table with small group differentiated instruction and related investments, which include materials and teacher development. The school saw that there was improvement, so they clicked the box in the middle of the table and chose improved, Finally, on the right side is the quantified amount of improvement, which the school found to be an improvement of 10% in STAR math and reading for math or reading assessments for ELs. Here are the LEA oversight questions. The LEA oversight questions relate to support, monitoring, and decision-making. The expectation is that each identified school will complete their own set of school-level questions and upload them to the GMS, and then that the LEA will complete one set of these questions, considering the data from all the schools, and upload the monitoring answers to the GMS as well. After the AOE has received all the answers to the questions, the School Improvement Grant Coordinator will meet with the school or schools and the LEA to discuss the responses provided. The responses to the monitoring questions for the LEA and schools will guide any findings or best practices that will be incorporated into the report. The monitoring report will be written by the School Improvement Grant Coordinator, making sure to include any findings or best practices. The draft report will be discussed with the LEA and school or schools so they can review any findings or best practices. If there are any questions or concerns, this is the time they should be brought up. The timeline for mid-year monitoring is as follows. The mid-year monitoring questions will be due in the GMS by February 28th, 2025. You will have the opportunity to submit them earlier as well. These discussions with the SI Grant Coordinator, the LEA, and schools will be scheduled on a rolling basis as the monitoring responses are submitted. These meetings will take place over Teams. With these answers, the grant coordinator will write a draft report, as already stated. The LEA and schools will review this report for confirmation of said findings or best practices, and then the final report will be uploaded to the GMS in approximately 3 weeks after the discussion of the responses with the LEA and schools. Just as a heads up, the end-of-year monitoring questions look very similar to the mid-year questions for both the schools and the LEA. We will update you again about the process for the end-of-year monitoring at a future office hours. The monitoring in GMS is being updated as we speak and should be open soon. We will send you a follow-up email with more information as to where to find the questions in the GMS and more when the site is ready. So keep your eyes peeled for that email. I think at this time we'd like to turn it over to you for questions. I'm going to stop sharing if that's okay.
So there are no questions in the chat right now, Mayor.
Okay, great. Let's give everyone a few minutes. I'm going to in the chat myself. Okay, great. We might have just set a record here. I guess that's what happens on a snow day. Or a rain day, as the case may be.
Very unusual for us not to
I
get
know.
questions about anything. Now's the
It will
time.
all be sent- It'll all be sent in an email, but especially for
Yeah.
those who aren't here.
I think we can stop the recording too, just to shorten that. We'll record it and caption it and send out the materials as well for those who couldn't.